The Honourable the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Honourable members of the House, I'd like to join in with my colleagues opposite in thanking the Lieutenant Governor for his eloquent delivery of the speech from the throne this afternoon. And I also want to thank His Honour, and not only His Honour, but also members, the justices, the judges of our courts, our civil leaders, leaders in business who joined us today, representatives from Labour, academia, church representatives that joined us here today, the community, cultural leaders, and also citizens of Newfoundland and Labrador who have either tuned in through the House of Assembly broadcast or joined us here in the House of Assembly for the throne speech today. Mr. Speaker, I want to take a moment to thank the movers and seconders of this motion this afternoon, member for Bayvert Springdale and also the member for Fortune Bay Cape Lahone, and thank both of them for their very thoughtful words that they shared with us this afternoon, Mr. Speaker. And I listened very carefully to them, and they both spoke of investments that were made in their districts, investments that we as a government have made in our districts. But more importantly, Mr. Speaker, if you listen carefully to what both these members talked about this afternoon, is they also talked about the impacts those investments are having on the people of Newfoundland and Labrador. They talked about it from a district perspective, and they've also talked from a provincial perspective, Mr. Speaker. I think it's very important words they brought this afternoon, and I thank both of them for their very well thought out comments this afternoon, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the work we do as a government is very difficult and challenging on a daily basis. We would never be able to continue to do the work that we do if it was not for the support and the work that we do together as a team and as a caucus. And I want to take a moment to express my sincere appreciation to all members of our caucus on this side of the House for their continued support, their unwavering support of not only me, but the ministers in our government who work on a daily basis for all people of Newfoundland and Labrador, Mr. Speaker. We wouldn't be able to do it without them, and I thank all of the members of our caucus for their support. Mr. Speaker, this afternoon we just a short time ago heard from the Leader of the Opposition and also heard from the member for St. John Centre on behalf of the third party. I want to thank both of them for putting their thoughts forward this afternoon and sharing their thoughts with us. Obviously, Mr. Speaker, that I'm going to take some time today to take some issue with some of the comments that both the Leader of the Opposition and somewhat to a lesser extent the member of St. John Centre in the comments they've made this afternoon. Because I've listened to their message, and I listen attentively to members of the House Assembly on a regular basis, Mr. Speaker. And I'm quite pleased in some sense because the member for the Leader of the Opposition, Leader of the Liberal Party this afternoon talked about that he's optimistic about the future, Mr. Speaker. And I say that's a very much a contrast from what we're used to hearing from the Leader of the Opposition, because we've heard him talk about Newfoundland and Labrador as the worst, the last, and the lowest. And he's used those words, Mr. Speaker. And he's talked about, and when he talks about Newfoundland and Labrador as the worst and last and lowest, he's talking about the people of our province as the worst, last, and lowest. Now, Mr. Speaker, that may be his belief and has been his belief in the past. And that may be where he likes to position himself, and that's where his thought process is, Mr. Speaker. But I can tell you it's certainly not reality. And it's not reality for me. It's not reality for us on this side of the House, Mr. Speaker, and I know it's not reality for thousands and thousands of Newfoundlanders and Labradorians, Mr. Speaker. It's finally good. It's also good, Mr. Speaker, to finally hear some ideas or concepts that the member opposite has, because he's been staying silent. He's stayed silent for many, many months. He's not been able to present a position. But it's very interesting this afternoon, Mr. Speaker, because if you listen to what he said, what he talked about plans in the future for his province, Mr. Speaker, it's exactly what we've been doing as a government for the last 10 years, Mr. Speaker. It's the work that we've been doing for the people of the province over the last 10 years, Mr. Speaker. And now he comes forward with the same ideas, the same concepts, and the same plans that we've been talking about for many, many years, and we've been doing for the people of Newfoundland and Labrador for many, many years. Mr. Speaker, when we came to office, took over government a decade ago. I can tell you the province was a very different place than it is today. Thankfully, we're in a different place today than we were a decade ago, because we've made advancements on so many measures and so many fronts. We've advanced employment, Mr. Speaker. with higher levels of employment than we've seen before. That's a fact, Mr. Speaker. We've done that. We've improved incomes, Mr. Speaker. That's a fact. We've improved incomes for Newfoundlanders and Labradorians. We've got unprecedented capital investment in our province, Mr. Speaker, like we've never seen before. Retail sales are higher than they've ever been before, Mr. Speaker, and that's a fact, Mr. Speaker. The economic activity in our province is second to none, Mr. Speaker. It's the strongest and best we've ever seen. Access to health care continues to improve by well-guided plans and hard work by our government over here, Mr. Speaker. Access to education and better education we continue to work on, and we continue to strive to make improvements on, Mr. Speaker, because that's what we're doing on this side of the House, Mr. Speaker. We continue to tackle child poverty. A member from St. John's Centre referenced it a few minutes ago, and yes, we're still committed to poverty, Mr. Speaker, and we have made better gains in poverty in Newfoundland and Labrador than any other jurisdiction in Canada can say, Mr. Speaker. We've made significant improvements in our infrastructure in our province. And we know that 10 years ago, Mr. Speaker, when we came to power, that we had significant issues with infrastructure throughout Newfoundland and Labrador, infrastructure of all kinds and all types. And we've continued to build our infrastructure because that's what leads to sustainable communities in our province. That's what leads to sustainable communities in rural parts of Newfoundland and Labrador and urban parts of Newfoundland and Labrador, in all regions, Mr. Speaker. If you've got strong infrastructure, it allows for strong communities, Mr. Speaker, and we continue to build the infrastructure for Newfoundlanders and Labradorians. Mr. Speaker, we've continued to make progress on the access to broadband. And it's an important matter, Mr. Speaker. It's important to provide those services to Newfoundlanders and Labradorians, and we've invested millions. We've developed partnerships with business, with national business, with local business, so that we can advance broadband services throughout our province. And, Mr. Speaker, we've made great gains as we've done this in openness and transparency and in accountability, Mr. Speaker. And I'm going to speak more about accountability because it's an important part of governance, Mr. Speaker. Very important part. Mr. Speaker, Newfoundland and Labrador is simply light years ahead of where we were a decade ago, where we were in 2003. And Mr. Speaker, for the opposition party to justify a message to say otherwise, Mr. Speaker, is simply not acceptable. It's not acceptable, Mr. Speaker, and I'm not going to stand for it either, because we've done great things in this province, and we've invested heavily in this province. Now, Mr. Speaker, you'll hear members opposite, and they've done it many times here in the House of Assembly, that they talk about where's the money gone, what have they done. They've talked about that the $20 million in revenues have been squandered, Mr. Speaker. Well, I'm going to tell you, Mr. Speaker, simply not so. Firstly, let's put this in perspective, because $1 billion a year of our oil revenues simply displaces, first and foremost, the $1 billion a year that the previous government was receiving from federal government in equalization handouts, because we no longer receive that. Because under our watch, we became a have province, Mr. Speaker, and the first thing to go was those transfer payments from the federal government, those equalization payments. And everyone can see where our revenue has been, where our revenue has gone, and where we've invested it, Mr. Speaker. Because today we have better health care. It's simply the truth. But we know we have more work to do, Mr. Speaker. We have new and improved hospitals. And we know, Mr. Speaker, we've made great improvements, but we have more work to do, Mr. Speaker. We have greater access to medical procedures than we've ever had before, Mr. Speaker. We still have work to do. We have state-of-the-art cardiac care program right here in Newfoundland and Labrador that's being watched by cardiac care programs right throughout North America and is seen as the best available anywhere in Canada, Mr. Speaker. We provide dialysis services close to where people live, Mr. Speaker. Life-sustaining dialysis services that are important to so many Newfoundlanders and Labradorians, and we've established more dialysis opportunities than we could ever have imagined a decade ago. We could never have imagined the advancements we're going to make in dialysis care, Mr. Speaker, so people can stay in their communities and receive this very much needed treatments. We're a nation leading in wait times, in wait time reductions. We've reduced wait times in hip and knee surgeries. One of the fastest growing demands in our healthcare service today is hip and knee replacements. And we've lowered the wait times. We're now nation leading in wait times for hip and knee replacements. Radiation treatments, Mr. Speaker, very important radiation treatments. We're leading the country in wait times. We've got more long-term care than we've ever had before. We've got more nurses working harder for Newfoundlanders and Labradorians, and we've got more doctors working in our province than we've ever seen before, Mr. Speaker. That's progress, and that's doing work for the people of our province. Now, Mr. Speaker, I talk about nurses because I can tell you I have tremendous respect for the people that work in healthcare. I have tremendous respect for public servants that do the work of government on a day-to-day basis. But, Mr. Speaker, I got to tell you that I sometimes get a little bit tired of hearing complaints from members opposite, who day after day come in here in question period and put questions to us criticising the work that public servants do. It's not that long ago. Well, you do. You do, I say to the member opposite. You do it. You do it on a regular basis, Mr. Speaker. And it's not that long ago the Leader of the Opposition said, and I heard him say it because I watched it on TV, when he said, yes, the nurses have to work harder. Well, Mr. Speaker, that's not where I am, because we get good value from our public servants. We get good value from those who work in healthcare, Mr. Speaker, and I have a lot of respect for nurses and the work that they do. And we need to work with them. And when we convened the Health Summit earlier this year, we learned a lot. And we're going to continue this work, Mr. Speaker, because we need to provide better health care to the people of the province. We need to find more ways of doing that. And sometimes the best way to find the better ways forward is to talk to the people who are on the ground, the people who deliver those services. And through the Health Summit that we convened, 300 experts that we had in a room in January, that was the discussion we had. We want to hear from them on how we provide those services and how we provide better services. And we're doing that, Mr. Speaker. And that's the difference in us. When you measure the difference in our party versus other parties, when the tough gets going, you know, we're getting tough. And we're going to make those decisions, Mr. Speaker. We're going to do it. And when we make those decisions, some people start to, wait, no, we weren't sure you're going to do that. And I'll give you some examples of that. Because we have to make tough decisions. Governing is not easy, Mr. Speaker. I'm going to tell you, governing is not easy to do. But we're willing to make those hard decisions, and we're going to do that, Mr. Speaker. And every chance I get, I will protect and defend the hard-working public servants that we are so blessed to have here in Newfoundland and Labrador. Mr. Speaker, we've made great progress in this province, and we've done it through development of plans. Unlike what the member opposite, the Leader of the Opposition, wants to acknowledge, we've developed plans, and we brought forward plans, and then we put them to work. In partnership with our public service, I add again, Mr. Speaker, as our public service that carries out the work on a day-to-day basis. We've done great plans and great advancements in childcare, and we're continuing to do that through our 10-year plan, Mr. Speaker. We've got new and improved schools. We've got them all over the province, Mr. Speaker. We've got improved curriculums. And as I said earlier, we're not there yet. We still have work to do, but we have better curriculums today than we've had before as a province. We've got better labs, free textbooks, the end of school fees, Mr. Speaker, the best student aid program in the country, the lowest tuitions because of our investment of $283 million that we've made since 2005 in Newfoundlanders and Labradorians, keeping them here, educating them here, so they can raise their families here and they can work here, Mr. Speaker. We've invested $6 billion in infrastructure. Now, Mr. Speaker, I ask members opposite, if that's squandering money, tell me what roads we shouldn't have paved. Tell me what investments we should not have made in infrastructure. Go ahead, I ask them, go ahead and do that, because they won't tell us. They won't tell us what school we shouldn't have built, or what hospital we shouldn't have built, what healthcare facility we shouldn't have built, what bridge we shouldn't have repaired, what road we built, Mr. Speaker, what roads we paved, what ferries we built. Absolutely, absolutely. Significant investments in ferry service. Mr. Speaker, $5 billion for Labrador. $5 billion we've invested in Labrador, Mr. Speaker. We've invested $1 billion in poverty reduction. The member opposite referred to it, the member of St. John's Centre referred to it, and I'm glad she did. Because as I mentioned earlier, we are committed to poverty reduction. It's better for people, it's better for our province, Mr. Speaker. It gives people opportunity to be contributors to our society, and that's what we need to do, and we're having great success in doing it, Mr. Speaker. We put $3 billion in debt reduction. And, Mr. Speaker, we took $3 billion and we put it back in the pockets of taxpayers through tax reductions. That's what we did, Mr. Speaker. We gave it back to Newfoundlanders and Labradorians. Mr. Speaker, we've made equity investments that have increased our returns in offshore. It puts us at the table with the offshore companies so we can realize better returns for Newfoundlanders and Labradorians. And, Mr. Speaker, we are making investments to develop Muskrat Falls so we can supply our own people, so we can supply our own industries with low-cost power while providing surplus power that we can sell to markets outside our province. Now, Mr. Speaker, that's about vision. That's about vision. That's about looking long-term of what's going to be the best thing for Newfoundland and Labrador, not only next year or in the next decade, Mr. Speaker, but what's in the best interest of Newfoundland and Labrador for the next century? Because that's how long these power plants last, Mr. Speaker. You heard through the speech from the throne In the last few months, I've met with other premiers, and I've had discussions about power. I've met with governors from the United States, New England governors, several of them, and had discussions with them about power. And Mr. Speaker, they need a source of clean, green, renewable electricity. And we have that source, Mr. Speaker. And being able to provide that such important power to markets outside of Newfoundland and Labrador, to other parts of Canada, and also in the United States, is going to pay dividends to Newfoundlanders and Labradorians for decades and decades to come. And I've talked in this House before about the Hoover Dam, because we can picture the Hoover Dam, 725 feet above ground, been producing clean, green electricity for 80 years, Mr. Speaker. And on the Churchill River in Labrador, we have 4 times the power capacity of the Hoover Dam, 4 times. And it's just waiting for us to develop it, for us to partner with the markets that need it, Mr. Speaker, and create that benefit and wealth for Newfoundlanders in years to come. And we're going to do that, Mr. Speaker. But, Mr. Speaker, don't forget, let's not forget, that at every turn and every corner, as we talked about moving forward at Muskrat Falls, members opposite, they criticized us. They tore us down. They took us on about it. They doubted it. They said, you shouldn't do that project. It's the wrong decision. It's the wrong thing to do, and you shouldn't do it. Well, Mr. Speaker, we made those hard decisions, and we did what was necessary. We did what was necessary for Newfoundlanders and Labradorians. And, Mr. Speaker, they will benefit from this for years to come. Despite the criticisms from members opposite, despite the fact they fought us on this on every corner. Now, recently, Mr. Speaker, I heard the Leader of the Opposition say, yeah, I think it's a good project now. Now, we've seen that from him before, because he wants to do it, doesn't want to do it, but now I heard him recently saying that it's a good project, Mr. Speaker, and I'm glad that he feels that way, and I hope he supports us as we continue to develop markets and the future for Labrador. But they've blocked us. Let's not forget, Mr. Speaker, as we had a vision, and we have a plan, we do have a plan and a vision for the future of Newfoundland and Labrador. The opposition party blocked us at every stage. The last thing they want us to do is to be successful. We are being successful with Muskrat Falls. We are being successful with our renewable electricity where they failed, Mr. Speaker. We're doing it when they couldn't, Mr. Speaker. Now, Mr. Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition likes to talk about planning, and he suggests and tries to say we have no plan. Well, Mr. Speaker, our plan is obvious, because we've been implementing our plan for a decade now. We've been implementing our work and our plan for a decade. And today, through the speech, we've laid out more concrete elements of what our future is going to hold for us as a government. And I tell you, we've stayed true. We've stayed true to where we are. And yes, we've had our bumps in the road. And we're going to have that. When you make hard decisions and you govern, you're going to have that. And, Mr. Speaker, but we're going to continue. We're going to continue to plan. We're going to continue to create that vision. And in the coming days, and through our budget, the members opposite and the people of Newfoundland and Labrador will learn more about our plan. And today we heard a little bit about the opposition's plan, as I've talked about. Now, they've been a long time developing it, and a long time is really not a plan. It was a few ideas kicked around by the Leader of the Opposition there today, but they still haven't come with their plan, because they stand here and criticize us on a daily basis. They do it here in the House of Assembly, and they do it publicly. But at no time do they say, here is the right thing to do. We don't think they've done the right thing. Here is the right thing to do. They never provide the alternative, Mr. Speaker, and I encourage anybody, when they speak to members of the House of Assembly, if you don't like our plan, or someone from the House says we don't like what you're doing, then ask the person what is the right thing to do. And they've changed their course as they've gone along, Mr. Speaker. They've done that from time to time. And we saw that with, through the House reform, the work that we're doing in reforming the House, Bill 42. Because first of all, the Leader of the Opposition was in favour of it. And then within a few hours, he said, well, he's not really in favour of it. Now, we talked through the House of Assembly, and we came to an agreement on a plan that we both agreed with, Mr. Speaker. And I was delighted, because I believed it was the right thing to do. We did work out a plan. I say to the Leader of the Opposition, we talked, we worked through the House of Assembly, through the debate in January that we had here on Bill 42, and we voted in favour of it, Mr. Speaker. And it wasn't long after that, members opposite were publicly talking about, well, you know, I'm really not sure if I should have voted for it. You know, they were starting to move off it again, Mr. Speaker, if they should have or shouldn't have. And they talked and they started to move again, Mr. Speaker. Now we hear rumblings that some of them over there may not be happy with what's happening now, and they may be against it again. But, Mr. Speaker, we'll have to wait and see. We'll have to wait and see what's going to happen. But, Mr. Speaker, the point is, Mr. Speaker, is that when you make tough decisions, yes, you can move off your decisions, If you believe that you should do something differently or find a different way forward, Mr. Speaker, then you can do that. But willing to stand up and say, well, here's why. Here's why I did it. Here's why I was where I was when I said that, when I took that position. I've learned something new. I've seen something different. Because when things aren't, you think you find a better way, you should take that better way, Mr. Speaker. But we don't know what their position is. And there's so many matters we don't know what their position is because they've changed it so many times. Mr. Speaker, there's been discussion today about openness and transparency. And the Leader of the Opposition again raised openness and transparency. And he talked a little bit about that. Mr. Speaker, just like to remind the people of the province that it was our government that proclaimed the Act when we came into power in 2003. And yes, Mr. Speaker, no, just hang on over there. I just say to the members opposite, relax, don't get too excited yet. So, Mr. Speaker, we did our review. And Mr. Speaker, we wanted to get it right. So we restarted the plan. We started a process that's going to bring us the best legislation in Canada. Clearly, Mr. Speaker, is going to bring us the best legislation in Canada. But today we heard the Leader of the Opposition talking about reforming campaign fundraising reform. He mentioned that this afternoon. Well, Mr. Speaker, he doesn't have to reform the law to be open and transparent on campaign funding. He can just lay it out if he wishes, Mr. Speaker. He can lay it out. If he wants to lay out who supported him in his leadership, like we did on this side of the House, he can just go ahead and do it. He doesn't need law or legislation to do that, Mr. Speaker. He can just go ahead and do that, Mr. Speaker. If he wants to, all the leadership candidates can do that. They don't need legislation to do it. We've done it. We've done it. We've laid it out. We've laid out who our supporters were.
Order, please. Order, please.
Member from Mount Pearl North did it. I did it. Our other candidate did it, Mr. Speaker. We laid it out. So Mr. Speaker, while they continue to speak out of both sides of their mouth, Mr. Speaker, you know, they said a few weeks ago they had a big dinner up in Toronto. They had their $10,000 plate dinner up in Toronto, Mr. Speaker. Said, oh yeah, we're going to release who's there. We haven't seen it yet. I haven't seen it yet, Mr. Speaker. They should release their leadership contributions, and they should. So you can't speak out of both sides of your mouth, Mr. Speaker. If you're going to do what you say you're going to do, then do it. When we talked about reforming the House of Assembly, members opposite said there's too many seats, we should reduce the number of seats. When I said, yes, well, let's do it now, well, hold on now, let's not do it now. So, Mr. Speaker, you can't talk out of both sides of your mouth. You can't, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, our short-term, we're all quite aware that our short-term, we have short-term challenges that are facing us, short-term economic and fiscal challenges. And Mr. Speaker, I know the members opposite are getting a little antsy. I guess they're not liking. We sat quietly over here as they spoke and presented their views, but they're getting a little antsy over now, Mr. Speaker. But Mr. Speaker, when oil dropped last year, members opposite will have you think that the whole world saw that coming. But Mr. Speaker, when jurisdictions throughout Canada, Canada itself, Newfoundland and Labrador are all being significantly impacted. Jurisdictions around the world are being significantly impacted by this unprecedented drop in oil. But, Mr. Speaker, what's important to reflect upon, and what's important for us to remember, that as a province, we're still pulling our own weight. We're still a have province, Mr. Speaker. We're still generating employment. We're still creating opportunities, and we still have businesses that are thriving, hire Newfoundlanders and Labradorians, and that our economy is still strong. Mr. Speaker, that's the rewards that we're receiving from the diversification of our economy that we've begun to create throughout our province. We've used our oil wealth to fuel non-renewable energy development. We've done that, Mr. Speaker. We're succeeding, as I've mentioned, where others have failed in the past. Muskrat Falls will become a legacy fund. Will become a legacy project for Newfoundland and Labrador. It will become that, Mr. Speaker. And when members opposite talk about, and people, not only members opposite, others have talked about, why don't you do what Norway did? Why don't you do what Norway did when they created a legacy fund? Well, Mr. Speaker, Norway never had a legacy fund for the first 20 years of oil production. They never created that fund until they produced oil for 20 years. Now, why was that? 5 billion. They produced 5 billion barrels of oil before they set up the legacy fund. And why did they do that? Because they needed to build their infrastructure. They needed to develop social programs, Mr. Speaker. They needed to look after their people, Mr. Speaker. They needed to do the things that we've been doing over the last decade before they began to develop their fund, Mr. Speaker. But we have our fund is underway. In many senses, in many respects, as I said, Muskrat Falls will yield billions of dollars in revenue for our people for generations to come. It'll fuel growth in industry, Mr. Speaker. It'll drive the knowledge-based economy that's going to complete the transformation of Newfoundland and Labrador, Mr. Speaker, because that's the future for us as a province, and that's where we need to go as a province, Mr. Speaker. We need to fuel industry and business. We need to move the technology industry, Mr. Speaker. And I've used these words before, so I apologize if I'm repeating myself, but only limited by one's imagination. It's only limited by what someone can create and envision as a future opportunity, and we've got to keep it grounded right here in Newfoundland and Labrador. Mr. Speaker, we used to be at one point in time seen as, by many, as Canada's poorest sister. But Mr. Speaker, today we're a national leader in so many fronts. We're a national leader throughout Canada, and we're seen internationally as a leader as well. When we have countries come to visit us, we have industries that represent countries around the world that want to come here to see how we're doing business and how we're tackling problems, and more importantly, Mr. Speaker, how we're finding solutions. That's what the future of Newfoundland Labrador is all about, Mr. Speaker. It is about the future. And sometimes we have to look at the past. Today, in the speech from the throne, we refer to veterans. And the speech references veterans and our past. Ordinary women and men who did extraordinary things. And they did extraordinary things for Newfoundland and Labrador. And I'm sure if we could reel back the clock, Mr. Speaker, and ask them if they think for a moment that they're going to be having an impact on the people of our province a century later, they would never believe it, Mr. Speaker. But they truly are. But, Mr. Speaker, we heard about these people that existed a century ago. And we've also heard today about people who very recently have put themselves on the line to help others in need. That's who we are, Mr. Speaker, as a province. That's who we are as a people. That's the value that we teach our children. And it's one of our greatest strengths. I believe it's one of our greatest strengths that we're tapping into, and we're going to build sustainable communities by the very strength of the people that live here and the people who raise their families here. The real measure of a government's success, Mr. Speaker, is progress. And after a decade of PC governance, the truth is that the sick are better cared for, our children are better educated, families are better off, businesses are thriving, opportunities are greater than they've ever been before. Mr. Speaker, we're not done yet. I can tell you now, we're not done yet. We've got more work to do. Mr. Speaker, we have more work to do, and I can tell you our party and our government remains committed to the people of Newfoundland and Labrador, and together we're going to continue to partner with the people of our province, the businesses in Newfoundland and Labrador, so Newfoundland and Labrador can be the best it will ever be, Mr. Speaker.